I was telling you, I was like, oh, I got to be with my attorney because my CFP, Anjali, which is a certified financial planner, which is like the gold star standard for financial advisors. She was like, Tiffany, you need to get your trust in order. And I was like, for why? Because I've got a
Mm,
really good, thorough will. And I was going back and
yeah.
forth. So I met with Tony, who's my attorney. And I was like, oh, because even me with all my learnings didn't fully get the difference between a will and a trust. I kind of got it, but not really. But now I feel like I'm like a good 80%, like, okay, not like I can't be an attorney, but I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I got it. Would you like to know what I learned about trust versus
Educate
will?
me. I would
Okay,
love to
so
because I was told to create a trust too, and I forget why, but I was
yes,
planning to do
exactly.
it.
So
Yeah.
typically, so the main difference is a will is supposed to say this is what happens to my stuff immediately after I pass away. Typically, like up to a year. That's like how much control you have. Like I pass away, this is what I want to happen to my stuff up to a year, right? A trust really is supposed to be like what happens in perpetuity. So if you have
Huh.
additional instructions, so let's just say for Rio, you're like, you know what? Something happens to you, God forbid, and you're like, but right now, yes, when I pass away, if something happened to me, then Rio would get my assets along with husband. But I really kind of want because I don't want because with children they typically don't get access to whatever funds until they turn 18. But let's be real, 18-year-olds ain't ready for no money, right?
No.
And so you
Give him
might
an
say,
AR-15, but don't give him money.
yeah, exactly. But you might say
That's the rule.
because I don't want my money or my assets to be given to my child even when he's 18, at least not right away. I want to have more control beyond that. A trust is where you say he can get the like, just enough for college at 18. He can get maybe half at 25 and the other half at 30. So a trust allows you to say beyond the initial, I'm not here instantly what happens with my assets. A trust will allow you to make decisions years and years and years from now. So typically people get trust when they want to do that, especially with their children, or if they want to leave something for generations that are not even here yet. So
Yeah.
you can
This is
put things in
this is where the
trust.
passing of wealth really happens.
Yes. Mhm.
Because
Because
it's not just your bank accounts, right? Is it also your
yes,
assets and your
yes.
business? What
So
happens
I'll
with your
give you an
business and all
example.
that?
So with my trust, I was like, okay, so I have a really clear cut will. If something happens to me, my parents get some money, and then my sisters really just split my account 4 ways because that's it,
Hmm.
So, but I was like, but my two of my sisters have children, so I wanted to dictate how I wanted that to look, just because of all that I'm going through with my late husband's assets. I'm like, oh, if I would have known this, we would have done this. I'm like, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, like if you leave money to a child, the state that you live in will typically hold those funds until they turn 18, and then they really can't do anything. The 18-year-old can blow it, which they likely will. And I'm just like, ugh, knowing what I know now, I'm certain that my husband would probably be like, I probably would have want to divvy it out a little bit further. And so with my trust, that's what I'm doing. So I have accounts for all the children in my life currently. So I've got like custodial accounts for Alyssa, my stepdaughter, where most of her college fund is. I've got for my nephew Roman, who is 6, my niece Amelia, who's 5, and my niece Lily, who is I believe 3 or 4. And but instead of having them be the beneficiaries, I've now going to make the trust the beneficiary. So if something happens to Auntie, your money goes to a trust, and the trust says, you thought you was getting this at 18, you're not. The trust said, because normally a will says, something happens to Auntie, it goes to you, the court will hold it. When you turn 18, it turns over. I'm like, no, 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 no. I want to still be here guiding you. So it goes to a
Yeah.
trust now, not to you. And the trust, then I can have a trust give it to you when you're 85 if I wanted to. So you can put things like that. Like, so it's not that. At first I was like, well, Tony, should I put, for example, my home in a trust? And the problem with doing so is that when you put an asset like that in a trust, it is a taxable event, meaning that the
Mm,
trust has to purchase the home, or if you transfer it to the trust, now the trust has to pay taxes on that home or you have to pay tax on the home because of the sale. So I was thinking, like, I thought that I had to transfer, for example, like say I have like an investment account. Let's just say there's $1 million in my investment account. And I'm like, okay, I want to put it in my trust. She's like, if you do that, you actually have to sell the investments and to put them into a trust. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. And she's like, what you're thinking about it, Tiffany, is that you really want to make, instead of your sisters the beneficiaries of that investment account, you make the trust the beneficiary. And so if something happens to you, then it gets switched over. Do you see? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, so one of the benefits of a trust is one, being able to tell what you want your money to do years and years and years from now. But also, a trust is going to allow you to sidestep some taxes because, like, say, for example, in the state of California, a state inheritance tax is pretty high. So something happens to me and my heirs inherit, the government is like, ooh, child, half that is mine, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
right? But with a trust, that's not so because no one is inheriting anything because it already belonged to the trust. But if someone wanted to
Gotcha.
go in and withdraw some of their money, then they'll pay income tax, but that's normal. So you're not paying this estate tax, but if you do withdraw money from the trust, then you pay income tax. So it helps to, one, avoid probate, which basically is like the ringside circus to all your stuff being divvied
Oh,
out. And
yes.
two, it
My
helps you
family's
to,
going through that.
like, I don't want to say avoid, but it helps you to sidestep inheritance tax because they're not really inheriting it. The trust is holding it. The trust basically is like you continuing to live and divvying it out. So it's just really interesting because one last thing for those of you who are business owners, because I know so many Brown Ambition listeners are business owners. I said, so Tony, how do I protect my business interests with the trust? Same. So and we should do this too, honestly, Mandy, we need to get on our operating agreement for Brown Ambition, sidebar. My operating agreement for the Literature Academy says, so my Literature Academy, I have a business partner in that business. And it says, if something were to happen to me, my shares in the Academy would go to a trust. Not at first it said it was going to go to my husband, but now I'm like, no, no, no. She's like, this is wiser. It goes to that trust. And then from that trust, it, gets divvied out to like my sisters, however. And so I'm like, okay, the rule of thumb with a trust is if you don't have at least $500,000 in assets, it kind of doesn't make sense. If you have over, I think it was like a million or two, or I think it's maybe 5 million in assets, something to that effect, you definitely ought to do it because the estate taxes would just be tremendous. So yeah, so I hope does that
Yeah.
make sense? That like a trust is like, I want to tell you what to do years from now. A will is like, I can only tell you what to do at the moment that I pass away.
Yeah. And it's not just about, I mean, I guess, and to your point, again, I'm trying to repeat it so that it sticks to my brain.
Hmm.
In a will, you could plot it all out. I want so and
Yes.
so to get this much at 18, that much at 25. But the key here is the tax savings, because
Hmm.
when it's inherited by an estate, like you said, you don't have to, or sorry, a trust, like you said, you don't have to pay that estate tax, right?
Hmm. Because in the
They'll pay
will, you
taxes on it
can
if they
say,
withdraw from it.
in a will, there's more leeway for people not to listen. Like meaning
Mm,
like you can say like, oh, like I can say like, Roman's going to inherit, but, and I really want it to be parceled out, but it doesn't have, it's typically not going to happen that way because if you leave money, you can have some direction for it. But ultimately the state is like, once this child turns 18, that's their business. But with a
mm,
trust, the trust is actually there's a trustee in place that actually by law must divvy it out per your instructions. The state is not gonna. The state is like the state that you live in, like New Jersey, New York. They don't work for you. They're like, sis, all this when he turns 18, 13. No, 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 no. Like,
yeah.
like when he turns 18, here's the life insurance. So that's another thing too that's in my trust, that my life insurance, especially with life insurance, because that's usually where you have the most, my life insurance, the beneficiary is going to be the trust. Because especially with the life insurance, they're like, girl, we don't care nothing about your divvying. The person is going to get it upon your death unless they're a minor, and then we will hold it until they're 18. That's on you how you want to divvy it up. But with the trust will divvy it up because they do work for you. And so just considering that if you have started to grow wealth beyond $500,000 or so, like I'm not going to put my home in a trust because the taxes I would have to pay as a result would just be too much. But making the trust the beneficiaries of parts of like my financial life is really going to help me to make sure that the wealth that I have grown, it sees more than one generation. That's really the
Yeah.
key because if my heirs inherit via a will, it could be gone in one generation. But a trust allows me to say, even if that generation messes it up, I have set aside for the one after that, and the one after that,
I
and the
was
one
going to
after that.
ask you, so do you have that in there, like Roman's
Yes.
heirs,
So I'm going to.
Amelia's heirs, Lily's heirs?
Or
Oh,
even
okay.
children that are not even born yet. Like for example, my sister Lisa
Yeah.
is really young. She's like, she hasn't had children yet, but if something happens to me, I want to put that in there. If another child is, sired, this is what's going to happen. And so it's just like, oh, I get it
Yeah.
now. Yes. And,
This
and,
is the
and
real
that's truly
stuff.
how yes, like the grown, like financial stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow.
It's so
Yeah.
good. It's such good timing too. Not just because someone had advised me to do it, but I was on a panel on Friday, like a Juneteenth, early Juneteenth panel.
Hmm.
And there was this incredible woman who I would love to have on the show. Consider this your formal invitation, Dr. Jolly. First of all, she has the most incredible name, Dr. Pamela Jolly.
I
She
love it.
is a generational wealth building expert in Black communities, and she has
Mm.
dedicated her career to working in the Black community and educating them on exactly what you're talking about. But her
Okay.
obsession, her passion is how to pass on generational wealth. And she
Mm.
literally was just making this point about how in our communities, so much is focused on accruing the wealth. And
Yes.
it's in the passing on of it. Is that even the right grammar? Anyway,
Hmm.
that we are sorely undereducated. So it's all synergy and all magic. I'd love to have
Yes.
her on someday. But yeah, absolutely. And, I think like the overall message is like the work is not done when you just earn the
Yes.
money.
Yep.
It's like the responsible thing to do truly for future generations is to um, take that money on a journey, and like where's that journey going to
Hmm.
take, how far is it going to
Yes.
go, and it's like you're ensuring that it's going to have a long
A
journey.
long, long, long life. Because it's not just because I've seen people, like there's this beautiful house here in Newark. And there's a woman here who used to live in that house, and she was like her grandmother was one of the first Black women millionaires. I forget what she did, and she built this beautiful historic home. Well, now it's historic. And now that home is in disrepair. So I'm like, so your grandmother built millions. It was passed on to your mom or dad, and now there's nothing for you. What a short-lived life of that
Yeah.
wealth. And it's like, why? And so one, we have to pass on knowledge, not just the wealth. So I'm always in Alyssa's
Yes.
behind, like the other day she asked me, she's like, can you buy me some summer clothes? I said, of course, sis. We can go right on to the outlet store and hit up Old Navy and the Gap because I know like they're gonna have solid clothes. I was thinking more like Sheen. I was like, no.
What is Shein? I'm not convinced that I could go on. I'm
I know.
convinced it's like a scam. How is
I
everything
know.
4.99?
I
Like
mean, and I
what?
was like, sis, first of all, you don't hang up clothes. You're gonna dry these clothes and they're gonna be plastic, like it's not happening. Right. But
Yeah.
I'm always talking to Alyssa about finances because I know I won't be here forever and I want to pass on the knowledge. So that's one. But just in case the knowledge don't stick, I am also passing along like yo
Some
kids,
guardrails.
kids, kids. Yes. And so that I think is what's missing. That it's not to say because people make mistakes. There was this really interesting YouTube documentary I was watching about the people of Appalachia, and there was a woman
Mm,
there. She had to be like in her 70s or 80s, and she did not have a college education or high school education. But she was just sharing how, like, generation after generation after generation of her family had lived in the Appalachian Mountains, and they had like 200 acres, it was just beautiful property. Here, this old woman is who's like, I don't have much learnings. And I've sent my kids to school, and my grandbabies are all college educated, and this son is an attorney, and all this stuff. But guess what? All this property that I have, one thing I didn't know was I put it in a trust. She said,
mm,
and when she said at the time I didn't get it, and I get it now, she said, because there won't be any weak links in this family destroying our legacy. And what she
yeah.
meant was with a will, you say, my son inherits this property. Great. But your son can then sell it to Walmart. Then what? Because you could only tell him what to do at the moment of your passing. You inherited it. With a trust is my son inherits his property and can never sell it. That's what the trust says. And
Mm,
has to pass it on to his son and his son and his son. So with a trust, you can say years from now what to do. And she basically was like, I don't want any weak links selling off this generational ancestral land to make a quick buck, because she said this land doesn't just belong to my son and my daughter, whatever. It belongs to all those that come after him. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, and so that's what's like so, it's just
Mm.
critically important. Estate planning is so important. And you might think to yourself, let me just give you a little encouragement. If you're like, well, I don't have a ton of money and yada yada yada. My husband, candidly so, never made over $60,000 a year. And before I got to him, this man had a personal policy of $250,000 that he set aside for his daughter. He had policies at work. I think the job policies almost total about 400,000, because he had life insurance at the job for about 200,000, and then he also had a pension, which was like another 150, 200,000, something to that effect. And so this is all before I got to him. Like he got additional life insurance at work. I just found out additional life
Mm.
insurance at work. So this is someone who, my husband, who did never made over 60,000. He prepared for his, and meanwhile he got the $250,000 policy when my stepdaughter Alyssa was 5. So he prepared in advance for, God forbid, something happened. Now, it's not enough that Alyssa will never have to work, but it's enough that she doesn't have to worry about school. She doesn't have to worry about her first car. She doesn't have to worry about prom. She doesn't have to worry about her sweet 16 that's coming up. She doesn't have to worry about even like the down payment on her first house. All those kind of like dad-esque financial things. This man who did not go to college, who did not make more than 60, provided for his family in this way. And so
I just got
I'm
chills.
encouraging you that,
Superman was the best.
that you don't have to make, I'm saying that because you don't have to make a ton. I know it's like, oh, well, Tiffany, that's easy for you to say, girl, what's your budget? He said, no, take me out of
Hmm.
it. This is what he did. And so I just want you to know that it is possible for you to do the same. It just means that you have to look at your paperwork and make a conscious choice. And that trust thing is so critically important because there are parts of his estate plan that he entrusted to folks who have now decided to not do what he initially intended. And so with a trust,
Mm.
there is no option to behave like that. And so that's why, like, I've really been on a crusade myself to be like, put it in trust if it makes sense for you. Make sure you have a very clear will about what you want to happen with your funds, and do not trust that someone else will take care of it. You can literally have the directions written in trust and in will, and not have to worry about like someone else, looking after the funds on your behalf or behalf of your child. Because when money comes, people act funny when the money hits.
Can we talk about this magical, mystical trustee? Because in my brain, I'm picturing like Dwayne the Rock Johnson. Like that's in like a real fire business suit, like maybe something that he wore in Ballers. Not that I have, solidified those to memory because he is fine. But anyway, I picture him like protecting the vault. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But where does one get the trustee? And is it through your financial? Is it a financial firm? Is it your attorney? What if she dies? Like, how does that all work?
So, I mean, I'm not an attorney, so I know that I'm a revocable trust. You can be the trustee on a revocable trust, which is what they suggest, that you be a trustee and then you have backup trustees. Right.
Okay.
So you're going to want, for your backup trustee, to your point, you're going to want someone who, like has some basic education. It's not that, that a backup trustee is not going to be allowed to just run rampant, because they can easily be sued for not doing what the trust says. And so you're going to want
Yeah.
someone who, at least can kind of understand the process, is not going to be overwhelmed by it. I don't know if you can ask your financial advisor, if I'm being honest. I just know with the revocable
I feel
trust that
like
you could
that's who it
be.
would be, like an estate planning attorney, like someone
Mm-hmm.
who's objective-ish and
Yes.
isn't a family member.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, I
gotta
guess
be.
I'm not gonna lie that I'm in the part now where I just spoke with Tony today, and she was like, "Oh, just so you know, a revocable trust is a trust that you can make changes on. You could make whatever decisions you want. Like that's when you hear people say, "I'm taking you out the trust." You could do that with revocable
Yeah.
trust. An irrevocable trust is locked, sis. That means you can't change beneficiaries or people without everyone in the who are beneficiaries agreeing. So I'll give you
Mm.
an example. Kobe Bryant listened to his mama and was like, I don't know if I trust Vanessa and them. And like,
Mhm.
because I have children and I want to make sure, God forbid something happens to me, that my kids are looked after. So he had an irrevocable trust created for his children, where the vast majority, like he left her something, obviously, like generously, but the vast majority of his wealth went to his girls. Now, here's the thing. The way his trust was set up, he did not add a child until they turned 1. So when he passed away, the baby was not 1 yet. And an irrevocable trust is basically locked unless everyone's in agreement, we can make a change. So she had to petition the courts to say, reasonably so, my husband would want his daughter in this kid's trust because that's what we did. She just was not 1 yet. So the judge had to be like, okay, everybody's okay. And so, but he made it irrevocable because he didn't want, like, God forbid, Vanessa, like, thinks she's dating someone now. Let's just say she marries this new guy and this new guy has 4 children of his own. And she's like, well, and he was like, well, I want my kids to have some of that money too. Kobe's from the grave is like, not my money. That irrevocable trust cannot be broken open to add some new folks. And so we have to be careful with irrevocable trust because it really is irrevocable. You can't just be like, I'm mad at my sister. She can't be in it anymore. It's irrevocable, sis, unless you call your sister and say, can you agree for me to remove you from that trust? So for now, I'm starting with a revocable trust. And maybe as I get a little older, like let's just say I'm 80, I'm like, well, let me go ahead and lock this in so can't nobody come in here make some changes. But yeah, that's the difference. And then with an irrevocable, I believe, if I vaguely remember that, I don't know if you're allowed to be your own trustee. I think you do have to get a trustee for an irrevocable. Don't quote me on that, but I know for a fact for a revocable that you can be a trustee and you should also have like some sort of like backup trustee. I'll just give you some quick little homework that Tony had given me before we had our call, a trust call. She said, name your trust. I mean, you can call it balloons. They don't care. But one thing she did say is be careful about naming your trust your name, like Tiffany Aliche Trust, because trust can be sued. So someone might be Googling like, I'm suing Tiffany. And they're like, ooh, girl, she got a $5 million trust.
Oh,
not my Bubbles trust. Bubbles and them, good luck finding that. Like that's not obviously the name of my trust. That's not the name of it. But just so you know, name it, but be mindful about using your name out of, just because. 2, figure out the beneficiaries of your trust. So like I said, for me, it's the kids and my sisters, yada, yada. 3, you have to figure out what bank you're going to want your trust because you have to fund it. And then 4, alternative trustees. So certainly you can be a trustee, but you have to figure out what are some alternative trustees. So I just think honestly, and as I move through the process, I will come up like, oh, today in trust, we did this because I think it's important for us to all learn because honestly, as much as Mandy and I have all this financial education, trusts yes, it's financial education, but it's also just a lot of law. And so I'm not an attorney and neither is Mandy. And so we get to learn firsthand, oh, that's how you do it. So as I learn more, I definitely will share more.
Isn't that the magic of the show? You come along for the journey. In a couple of years now, it will be like, yeah, remember that trust? Oh, yeah, we were babies then. We're talking. I don't know what we'll be doing in a couple of years from now. Who knows? But yeah, that's awesome. And I think so. I definitely want to have Dr. Jolly on. I got to remember to invite her on because I think about my great-granddaddy Woodruff was my dad. I had no idea. He was a successful farmer and he had a profitable farm in Carrollton, Georgia, land and cattle and farmland and was a businessman.
Wow.
And a couple of generations from him, lots of my dad's family have not ever seen a piece of that. And it was very much because of that lack of the passing on of generational wealth and you mentioned the probates and the so-and-so sold the land to a developer, just like you said. And I'm just beginning. I'm having these conversations that are blowing my mind. I'm gonna have to get down to Carrollton, Georgia. I want to learn all about this. But yeah, such a relevant conversation.
You could have been a trust fund baby.
It's a shame too, I know. My living uncles, my great uncles, they were sharecroppers. I'm not. It's not, and that's what Dr. Jolly talks about is how close we are to ancestors who were working in fields as slaves and then sharecropping and all of that. And, and being 4 generations from that and the lack of education, like you're saying, that's why it's so crucial, has created this fractured timing, this fractured growth where we're not actually benefiting and building upon that foundation. It's we got to tear the house down each generation and start from scratch.
Yes,
and we got to break that cycle. Yes, absolutely.
I love that.
So I look forward to more of your gems.
I love that. Tear the house down with each generation, literally rebuilding every single generation. That's such a great analogy.
Yeah, because my great granddaddy Woodruff had to learn the same stuff I'm learning. Different
Mm,
different industry. Obviously, I'm not out here with pigs,
yeah,
but all those lessons. You know,
yeah.
who knew? I didn't know that was
Mm.
in my history. So yeah, powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. And thank you as always for sharing and letting us peek into your get some free secondhand advice. We love it.
My messy life.
Yes.